This instructional covers setup for interview, basic interview. The first important thing is to try and set up in a room where there isn't any predominant ambient sound. Traffic, kids, sound of music, the sound of the refrigerator going on and off can be distracting enough and also make it impossible to edit together various sound bits. Also, this room is light tight. You can see the window has been blacked out. That way we only deal with the light and the color temperature of these lights. Now, these are rather inexpensive lights. They're umbrellaed, so they're soft. They create a much more attractive lighting on the skin, and they're really highly preferred. They're also not very expensive lights, so that they don't have control over their brightness or dimness, but you can control it. In this case, you can see the light on the left, which is going to be used as the key light, is half the distance from the light than the light on the right is, which is the fill light. And then we have this last light, which is the hair light, which is good at creating that classic three-point lighting setup. One thing that's very important in these kinds of interview situations is to control the ratio between the key light, which is brighter, and the fill light, which is a little bit dimmer. But in this case, there's not a high difference, not a high contrast between those two. One wouldn't want a high contrast between the key and the fill unless it was an extremely dramatic interview. I'm including instruction here on using the tripod, not because it's a complicated piece of equipment, but because it's one that's frequently underutilized. People don't use it right. So the first thing is, when you're setting up a tripod, to get the legs even, instead of trying to do it with the legs spread and so on, try it this way. Just flip it upside down, pull the legs up, and then you can even them against your hand. And that makes sure that each leg starts out as even. Now, if your floors are level, that's fine. If they're not, you're going to have to adjust after the fact. But it's a fast and simple way. You wouldn't be surprised how many people don't do that. The next issue with setting up the tripod is making sure that it's basically firmed up. Now, there's the control arm, which has its own little screw tightener. Got to make sure that that thing's good and tight. Second of all is this little screw nut here that people frequently forget to tighten down. That one still allows the tripod head to pan. You'll notice I'm adjusting here the actual pan nut. And then this is for what we call the tilt. And these tripods generally have variable adjustable drag, meaning you can tighten it so that it has more drag. When we're putting a camera on, you absolutely have to make sure your tripod is steady and locked down. You don't want to be putting a camera on a loosey-goosey tripod. Many camera damage situations have happened. The other thing is you have to make sure that the plate on the bottom of the camera is really snugged in. You'll see I'm really going at this to make sure that this plate, mounting plate, is snugged in. Now, there are a couple ones. There are small ones like these or larger ones. The next part is getting ready to put the plate into the quick release setup. This is a quick release setup. You sort of cock it and get it ready for the camera. You go nose down, and then as you drop the back end, it locks in place and you cinch it down. And here I'm adjusting the drag so you can see we have some play, but it's good to keep it relatively locked down. Once the camera is fully secured on the tripod, it's time to power it up. Since you're shooting in an indoor environment, you're probably going to have household current available to you. You could use batteries, but why do that and run the risk of running out of battery? Now, this is the camera charge, the battery charger. So you see it can charge batteries, or you can plug in this other little adapter, and this connects the camera directly without having to use a battery. By the way, remember, you can't charge batteries at the same time that you have the plug-in power adapter for the camera. So here's the battery, and it fits in to the back of the camera. It takes a little bit of fooling around. There's a button that locks and unlocks the battery. And likewise, you take the adapter and you sit it into the same location as where the battery was. Takes a little fooling around to get it to snap in, but once it snaps in, it'll be pretty good and secure. That's the battery. So now you're connected. And here's the power switch. It's a combination of a white push-in button, and then you slide it to the right, the light will come on. Now, if you should open up your monitor and realize, hey, I don't have a picture, one of the common mistakes is to forget to take the lens cap off. Please note, don't lose the lens cap. This happens every semester, and they're not cheap to replace. So you want to make sure you're going to come back with a lens cap. Assume that the camera you have taken out has been altered and customized by the last user and not put back to neutral. This is terribly important because it ruins many projects when you don't make this assumption. The first thing you should do is turn the scroll wheel found near the rear part of the camera to scene 1. This is a basic preset scene. We're actually going to initialize that scene as well to make sure that you don't have any particular customized scene dialed in. Next, find the Auto Menu slider and slide it to manual because we're going to be doing all of our settings manual. We're going to be doing our lighting, our exposure, our sound, everything manual. Next, find the neutral density knob and make sure that that is clicked to off. I'm assuming that you're going to be shooting in a studio situation for this interview and that your lighting is not going to be so bright that you'll need the neutral density filter on. Now, of course, if you're shooting outdoors, this may be different. Next, find the gain switch. It's a little switch, and confirm that that is switched to L or low. This is the correct place to start out. To start out with a low gain. Low gain will give you the cleanest picture. If you do discover later on after we do more of these adjustments that you still don't have enough light to get a proper exposure, you may have to then adjust that gain to a medium M or high. But we'd like to start off with a low gain. The next thing we want to do is to press the shutter display button and then toggle through or roll through the various shutter choices. We're going to be shooting at 1/60th of a second. This is a good shutter rate for the frame rate that we're going to be dialing in later. Watch out because this is one of the places where people tend to have customized the camera before you used it, leaving a much higher shutter rate and making it unable for you to get even a decent exposure. The next thing is to go into the actual menu. Using the LCD screen and the menu button and then that little jog wheel, you're able to go in and adjust settings. First setting we want to do is initialize the scene file. The scene, remember we dialed it at scene 1. Well, we want to make sure it's absolutely vanilla scene 1, so we go in there and initialize that file. We pop back out to the basic menu again. And the next thing we're going to adjust is the recording setup. In the recording setup, we are going to choose AVCHD. Notice you have a choice between that and DV. AVCHD is for our high definition. For record format, we're going to use PH 1080 30p. That will give us the highest quality picture and be compatible with uploading for YouTube and so on. It's a good all-round setup. AVCHD 1080 30p. The next setting we want to go into is to look at the audio mode. And in this case, we're going to want linear PCM, not Dolby. Finally, we want to go into display setup. And here you're going to see Zebra Detect. We want to make sure Zebra 1 is 70%. This is crucial. Zebra 2 can be whatever you want, but Zebra 1 needs to be 70%. White balancing ensures the proper balance of colors to produce an even looking exposure. Simply point the camera at a white card in the lighting environment of your subject, press the AWB or automatic white balance button and hold it. The image in the LCD will go black and then will come back on and your white balancing will be accomplished. Set up the focus assist. Switch the focus to manual and press the focus assist button. A red frame will appear around your picture and whatever's in focus will be fringing red. Manually use the focus ring on the lens to bring into focus. In this case, if you're shooting a person, it should be their eyes that are in focus. You'll see fringing around the eyes. You will need to use both the waveform and the zebra functions. The zebra function is activated by pressing the zebra button and toggling through the zebra choices. Remember that 70% zebra? That's what we want to dial up. You need to turn the iris and toggle it to manual iris. That way, you can control the iris, opening it all the way or shutting it down to the various f-stops using the ring on the lens. The waveform monitor built in produces a waveform that analyzes and displays the various brightness levels. This is key and critical. We're actually going to be using very precise measurements when it comes to setting our exposure. Notice that bright things are taller or higher, have higher altitude on the monitor, and low things have lower position on the monitor. It's important to turn off the servo to manual. This disengages the motor that controls the zoom ring, making it easily movable by your hand. To set the exposure, we're going to open up the aperture ring here and show you two models that are standing in. And you're seeing the zebras that are showing us all those values that are 70% or higher. Now I'm engaging here the waveform monitor, and we can see how the waveform depicts as we open up and let in more light. You can see at the very top end are the brightest tones. The zebra tells us what is 70% or brighter, and the waveform gives us the entire sort of tonal spectrum of brightness and darkness. I have two different complexions on these dolls so that we can see an exposure for a light-skinned subject is not going to be good for a dark-skinned subject and vice versa. So what you should deduce from this is that you have to set exposure according to skin tone, and it is different depending upon the tonality of the skin of the person that you're shooting. If you were to use an automatic exposure built into the camera, depending upon the background, the camera will either underexpose one model or overexpose another model, another subject. So auto exposure has really no use for us in this studio setting. Here's an example of using both the waveform monitor and the zebra to get correct exposure. In this first example, the aperture is open so much that we can see first on the 70% zebra that much of the face is zebraing. More than just spots, there are large pools that are zebraing. If we switch to the waveform monitor, you can see that the areas that correspond to those zebraing areas are well above the 70% or the 70 IRE levels. So we turn down the aperture. In this next image, you can see once we switch to the zebra, that only one spot, only one specular highlight at the top of the head is showing anything above 70 IRE, and the rest of the face has no zebraing. If we switch over to the waveform monitor, we can see that all of that area is well below the 70% line. The third exposure is correct. If we look at the zebra, you'll notice there are small areas the size of a coin or so that contain the specular highlights at various points around the face, but no large pools are zebraing. When we switch now to the waveform monitor, we can clearly see that the area of the face that is receiving the key light is hovering just at or slightly below 70% or 70 IREs. And that's why we don't see large pooling of zebraing at 70. This is the appropriate exposure for a light complexioned face. You are required to use the lavalier microphone. It's a high quality microphone and it gets it really close to your subject. There's an on switch, two positions. There's a straight line for a flat, and then there's a crooked line to roll off the bass. Use the crooked line bass roll off. Remember, this is a powered microphone. It uses a AA battery. Make sure you have one on hand in case this one has been used up by the previous user. The microphone plugs in to an XLR cable. This is a locking cable that you'll then plug in to the camera XLR inputs. This is a professional quality camera connector. The XLR mic cable plugs into the front of the camera around the other side. We're going to be using input 1 or channel 1, and it's important because we have to make sure this signal path is correct. Then we're going to turn on line 1 or input 1 and turn on line 2 or input 2 and make sure they're both set on mic. It's terribly important to get these little switches right. So channel 1 is going to be our lavalier mic, and we're going to choose that, we're going to call that input 1. So that means that the microphone is going to be sending a signal to line 1, which you can see indicated here by the moving LED lights. Line 2 or channel 2, we're going to use the internal mic, which is built into the camera. We're using this only as a scratch audio source. This is not a source of sound that you're going to use in your final piece. We're setting the levels for channel 1, which is our lavalier, to manual. And you can set the levels for channel 2 to automatic. We're not using that sound except simply as a scratch audio track. You adjust the sound levels by changing the dials for each respective channel. The important thing is to make sure the sound is loud enough, but not so loud, indicated by the VU.
Test 1, 2, 3, 4. Check. Test 1, 2, 3, 4.
Remember, we only care about line 1 or input 1 channel sound. This is the one that we're going to be adjusting and will be used in the final work.